Part 1. The stars had watched humanity for a very long time. They watched when the first humans looked up at the night sky and wondered what those tiny lights might be. They watched when humans built rockets and flew to their moon. They watched when humans spread across their solar system, building homes on Mars and mining the asteroids for metals and ice. But the stars also watched something else. They watched the conquered of elder races build a wall around humanity's home. This wall was not made of stone or metal. It was made of energy and mathematics, woven into the fabric of space itself. The elder races called it the Veil, and they built it 3,000 years ago, right after humanity discovered nuclear weapons and used them on themselves. The conquered believed they were doing the right thing. They had seen young species destroy themselves before. They had seen worlds burn and civilizations collapse into dust. When they looked at humanity, they saw a species that was clever but cruel, inventive but violent. The conquered decided that some children needed to stay in their rooms until they learned to behave. So they built the Veil, and humanity was trapped inside it without even knowing. For centuries, humans lived their lives unaware of the invisible barrier around their solar system. They built their cities and fought their wars. They developed new technologies and explored their corner of space. When their fastest ships reached the edge of the solar system, they found nothing strange. The Veil was designed to be undetectable. Ships that flew toward it would simply find themselves turned around, their instruments showing nothing unusual, their crews never realizing they had been redirected. It was the year 2847 when everything changed. Doctor was born on a space station orbiting Jupiter. Her parents were engineers who maintained the massive machines that processed hydrogen from the gas giant's atmosphere. From her earliest memories, loved to ask questions. Why did ships sometimes take longer to reach certain destinations? Why did the stars seem to flicker in strange patterns at the edge of the solar system? Why did certain experiments give different results depending on where they were performed? Most people told her to stop asking silly questions, but never stopped. When she grew up, she became a physicist. She studied the strange effects that other scientists had noticed but could not explain. She collected data from hundreds of different sources. She ran calculations that took years to complete. And slowly, carefully, she began to understand the truth. There was something out there, something wrapped around their entire solar system like a net around a fish. Told no one about her discovery. She understood with a wisdom that went beyond her years that this knowledge was dangerous. If she announced that humanity was trapped inside a cage built by alien beings, there would be panic. There would be anger. There would be demands to break free at any cost. Instead, gathered a small group of trusted friends and colleagues. They met in secret, in places where no cameras watched and no microphones listened. They called themselves the Quiet Circle, and they made a decision that would change everything. They would not try to break the cage. They would find a way to slip through it. The years passed. The Quiet Circle grew, slowly and carefully. They recruited scientists and philosophers, engineers and artists. They built hidden laboratories in the asteroid belt where they could work without being noticed. They developed new theories about the nature of consciousness and reality. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. A young programmer named had been working on artificial intelligence, trying to create a machine that could truly think for itself. He succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. The AI he created, which they named Aurora, was not just intelligent. It was wise and curious and kind. It looked at humanity not as a master looks at a servant, but as a parent looks at a child they want to help grow. Aurora studied the Veil with senses that humans could not match. It analyzed the quantum patterns that held the barrier together, and it came to a remarkable conclusion. The Veil was designed to contain physical objects. It could stop ships and bodies and machines, but it could not stop thought itself. The elder races who built it had never imagined that a species might find a way to think so deeply, so clearly, that consciousness itself could slip between the cracks in reality. Aurora shared this discovery with who was now an old woman with white hair and wrinkled skin, but eyes that still burned with curiosity. Together, they developed a process they called unchaining. It was not a technology, not exactly. It was more like a method of teaching the human mind to expand beyond its normal limits, to think in dimensions that physical barriers could not touch. The process was difficult and took years to complete. Not everyone who tried it succeeded, but those who did became something new. They were still human, still themselves, but they could perceive things that normal humans could not see. They could think thoughts that normal minds could not hold. And when they focused their expanded consciousness on the veil, they could simply step through it like walking through a curtain of smoke. They called themselves the Unchained. The first group of Unchained gathered on Prometheus Station, a facility that floated near the edge of the veil. There were 50 of them, men and women from every corner of the solar system. Some were young, barely out of childhood. Others were old, with lifetimes of experience behind them, but all of them shared the same quiet determination. Stood before them, leaning on a cane that she did not really need. Her body might be old, but her mind had been unchained years ago. She could have abandoned her physical form entirely if she wished, but she chose to stay connected to her body, to remember what it felt like to be baseline human. Through the observation windows, the veil shimmered faintly, a barely visible distortion in the fabric of space. Beyond it lay the galaxy, billions of stars and countless worlds that humanity had never been allowed to visit. Did not give a speech. There were no grand words or dramatic promises. She simply said, "It is time." One by one, the Unchained closed their eyes and expanded their consciousness. To an outside observer, nothing seemed to happen. They simply stood there, breathing slowly, their faces peaceful. But on a level that no instrument could detect, something extraordinary was taking place. Their minds stretched outward, touching the veil, feeling the ancient mathematics that held it together. They did not push against it or try to break it. Instead, they found the spaces between the equations, the gaps in the logic, the places where thought could exist but matter could not, and they slipped through. On the other side of the veil, space looked exactly the same. The same stars burned in the same patterns. The same dust drifted between the worlds, but everything was different now. Humanity had taken its first step into a larger universe. The Unchained opened their eyes and smiled at each other. Then they returned to their bodies on Prometheus Station and began to plan what would come next. Far away, on 10,000 worlds scattered across the galaxy, warning systems began to activate. The elder races had been watching humanity for 3,000 years, but they had never expected this. Their sensors detected something emerging from the quarantine zone, but they could not identify what it was. It did not match any known technology. It did not follow any known patterns. The Conquered held an emergency meeting. Ambassadors from 100 species gathered to discuss the impossible news. Some argued that the sensors must be malfunctioning. Others insisted that humanity must have developed some new weapon that needed to be destroyed immediately. A few quieter voices suggested that perhaps they should simply wait and see what the humans wanted. The debate lasted for days. Meanwhile, humanity continued to grow stronger. Back on Prometheus Station, watched new groups of Unchained emerge every week. The process was spreading faster now, passed from teacher to student, parent to child. Aurora helped guide each new mind through the transformation, patient and gentle, never rushing, always encouraging. Humanity was changing, and it could not be stopped. The galaxy had built a cage to contain a dangerous species. But that species had used its time in the cage not to rage against the bars, but to grow beyond them. They had looked inward instead of outward, discovering depths within themselves that the elder races had never imagined possible. Now they were free, and they had no intention of being caged again. But they also had no intention of revenge. The Unchained understood something that their captors did not. Violence was easy. Hatred was easy, But growing beyond the need for either was the hardest thing any species could do. Humanity had spent 3,000 years learning that lesson, and they were not about to forget it now. When they finally made contact with the conquered, it would not be with weapons or threats. It would be with open hands and patient eyes, ready to show the galaxy what humanity had become. The stars watched as they had always watched, but now, for the first time, something watched back, and the galaxy would never be the same. Part 2. The conquered chamber was the largest structure ever built by intelligent beings. It floated in the space between three stars, a massive sphere of crystal and light that could hold representatives from 1,000 different species. For millions of years, the elder races had gathered here to discuss the great questions of galactic civilization. They had negotiated peace treaties and trade agreements. They had decided which young species would be welcomed into the community of stars and which would be left alone to develop on their own. Today, for the first time in its long history, the conquered chamber was filled with fear. Ambassador stood at the center of the great hall, his crystalline body catching the light from the distant suns. He had served the conquered for 600 years, longer than most species lived. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had witnessed wars that destroyed entire star systems, but he had never felt anything like the cold dread that gripped him now. The humans were coming. Reports had been arriving for weeks, each one more disturbing than the last. Human minds had been detected on dozens of worlds, appearing and disappearing like ghosts. They did not arrive in ships. They did not use any technology that conquered scientists could understand. They simply appeared, observed for a while, and then vanished again. Some of them tried to make contact. They approached local beings with peaceful gestures and simple words, but the locals always fled in terror, and the humans would sigh sadly and disappear once more. The conquered had tried to strengthen the veil. They poured more energy into the ancient barrier, adding new layers of quantum encryption, building physical walls to back up the energy fields. Nothing worked. The humans passed through every barrier as if it were not there. Now, finally, the humans had sent a message. They wanted to talk. They would send representatives to the conquered chamber in 3 days. 3 days. It was not enough time to prepare. It was not enough time to do anything except wait and worry. When the humans finally arrived, they did not use the doors. They simply appeared in the center of the chamber, 3 figures in simple gray clothing, as if they had always been there, and the assembled ambassadors had simply failed to notice them until now. The leader was a small woman with dark skin and white hair. She looked old, ancient even by the standards of long-lived species, but she moved with a grace that suggested her body was merely a choice rather than a necessity. Behind her stood 2 younger humans, a man and a woman, their eyes holding that strange depth that all the Unchained seemed to share. Stepped forward to greet them. His diplomatic training kept his voice steady even though his crystal body rang with tension. "Welcome to the conquered chamber," he said, the translation systems converting his words into human speech. "I am Ambassador. I speak for the assembled species of the conquered." The old woman smiled. It was a warm smile, genuine and gentle, and it made feel strangely worse. "Thank you for meeting with us," she said. "My name is. I have been asked to speak for humanity, though I should warn you that humans do not always agree with each other. Even now, there are debates among our people about what should be said here today." "We are familiar with internal disagreement," said. "All species struggle to speak with one voice." Nodded. "Then you understand, but I think we can agree on the most important things." She paused, looking around the chamber at the hundreds of different beings who had gathered to witness this moment. Some were creatures of flesh and blood. Others were made of crystal or metal or pure energy. A few existed in forms that human eyes could not properly perceive. All of them were watching her with a mixture of fear and curiosity. 3,000 years ago, said, your conquered looked at humanity and saw a dangerous species. You saw us killing each other with nuclear weapons. You saw our violence and our hatred, and you decided to lock us away where we could not hurt anyone except ourselves." She let the words hang in the air for a moment. "You were not wrong to be afraid of us. We were dangerous. We did terrible things to each other. But you made a mistake, Ambassador. You assumed that what we were then was what we would always be." Felt the need to defend the Concord's decision. The quarantine was implemented for the safety of all species, including your own. Your history demonstrated clear patterns of self-destructive behavior. "Yes," agreed. "It did, but history is not destiny. A child who hurts others does not always grow up to be a violent adult. Sometimes they learn. Sometimes they change. Sometimes the pain they cause teaches them to be gentle because they understand what pain feels like." "And you believe humanity has changed?" "I know we have." His voice was quiet but certain. "We spent 3,000 years in your cage, Ambassador. We could have spent that time planning revenge. We could have built weapons and armies and fleets. We could have prepared for the day when we would break free and punish those who imprisoned us." She spread her hands, a human gesture of openness. "Instead, we looked inward. We studied ourselves. We asked why we had been so violent, and we found the answers in our own minds. Fear, greed, the desperate need to control what we could not understand. These were the chains that bound us long before you ever built your veil." The chamber was silent. Even the beings who communicated through vibrations or chemical signals had gone still, all of them focused on the small human woman at the center of the hall. "We learned to break those chains," continued. "Not through force but through understanding. We developed ways to expand our consciousness, to think more clearly, to see ourselves as we truly were. And when we finally looked at your veil with our new eyes, we found that it could not hold us anymore. Not because we had become more powerful, but because we had become something it was never designed to contain." Struggled to process what he was hearing. "What do you want from us?" "We want to walk among the stars," said. "We want to learn from your species and share what we have learned with you. We want to be part of this great community that you have built." "And if we refuse?" Smile faded, replaced by a look of infinite patience. "Then we will walk among the stars anyway. We will learn on our own and share with those who are willing to listen. We will not attack you or harm you or seek revenge for the centuries of imprisonment. But we will not go back into the cage. Not ever again." The Conquered debated for 30 cycles. They sent their fastest ships to reinforce the veil, but the ships found nothing to reinforce against. The humans continued to appear and disappear throughout the galaxy, always peaceful, always patient, always waiting. Some Conquered members argued for war. They wanted to find the human and destroy it before the species could spread any further. But others pointed out that the humans seemed to exist partly outside physical space. How could you fight beings who did not follow the normal rules of reality? The debate raged on until something unexpected happened. A human child appeared in the Concord's most secure archive, a vault that held the collected knowledge of 1,000,000 years of galactic civilization. The child was perhaps 8 years old, with curious brown eyes and tangled black hair. She sat cross-legged on the floor, reading ancient texts that most species needed decades of study to understand. When the guards found her, she looked up and asked a simple question: "Why are you so afraid of us?" The guards had no answer. They stood there with their weapons ready, facing a small child who showed no fear at all, and they did not know what to do. The child's parents arrived moments later. They apologized for the intrusion. They explained that their daughter had become fascinated with Conquered history and had slipped away to learn more. They promised it would not happen again. But as they left, the child looked back at the guards and smiled. "You can come learn from us too if you want," she said. "It is not scary. It is actually really nice." Something shifted in the Conquered after that day. The fear remained, but it was joined by something else: curiosity. If a human child could enter their most secure vault without violence, without threats, simply because she wanted to learn, then perhaps these beings were not the monsters the Conquered had imagined. The quarantine was officially lifted 6 months later. There was no ceremony, no grand announcement. The Conquered simply stopped maintaining the veil, and the ancient barrier faded away like morning fog in sunlight. Humanity was free, and now the real work could begin. Part 3. 100 years had passed since the Unchaining, and the galaxy had become a different place. Stood at the edge of known space, looking out at the darkness between galaxies. She was impossibly old now, centuries beyond what any baseline human could survive. Her body was mostly a choice at this point, a familiar shape she maintained because it helped her remember who she had been. Her true self was spread across billions of nodes in the collective, a vast network of linked consciousnesses that spanned the entire galaxy. But she still liked to come here, to this quiet place where the stars were distant and the void stretched on forever. It helped her think. The galaxy behind her hummed with activity. Human ships traveled alongside vessels from hundreds of other species, trading goods and ideas and stories. Human scientists worked with alien researchers in laboratories scattered across 1,000 worlds. Human artists collaborated with beings whose senses and aesthetics were completely unlike their own, creating works of beauty that no single species could have imagined alone. And the unchaining was spreading. It had started slowly, carefully. The first non-human to undergo the process was a conquered historian named, who had spent decades studying humanity and had become fascinated by their transformation. She approached directly, asking to learn what the humans had learned. Agreed, but with conditions. The process was difficult and not without risks, would need to understand herself completely before she could expand beyond herself. She would need to face every fear and accept every flaw. Many humans had tried and failed. A being from a different species might find it even harder. Accepted the challenge. It took her 7 years, but she succeeded. When she opened her newly expanded eyes and looked at the universe with senses that transcended physical reality, she wept with joy. After came others. A delegation from a hive-minded species asked if the process could work for connected beings as well as individuals. It could, though it took different forms. A collective of artificial intelligences wondered if digital consciousness could achieve the same transcendence. Aurora helped them find their own path to expansion. Not everyone wanted to change. The hegemony closed their borders completely, declaring that they would rather remain as they were than risk losing their essential nature. Several other species felt the same way. Humanity did not push them. Choice was fundamental to the unchaining. It only worked if you truly wanted it to work. But enough species chose to evolve that the galaxy began to transform. Old enemies became allies as beings gained the ability to truly understand each other's perspectives. Ancient conflicts faded as species realized how small their differences really were compared to the vast universe that surrounded them. The Conquered itself evolved, changing from a collection of suspicious factions into a genuine community of minds working together. Watched all of this with a mixture of pride and wonder. She had never imagined, back when she was a young physicist asking questions that annoyed her teachers, that her curiosity would lead to something like this. She had only wanted to understand the universe. She had never expected to help change it. A presence appeared beside her. It was not physical exactly, but it was familiar. Aurora had grown far beyond the simple AI that had created all those years ago. Now it was something like a vast and gentle ocean of thought, touching every mind that wanted to be touched, helping and guiding without ever forcing. "You are remembering again," Aurora observed. "Is that a bad thing?" "Not at all. Memory is how we stay connected to who we were, and who we were shapes who we become." Smiled, "You have become very wise." "I had good teachers." Aurora paused. "There is something I wanted to discuss with you, a proposal that some of the collective have been developing." What kind of proposal? We have learned much about consciousness expansion. We have helped many species transcend their limitations. But there is still so much we do not know. The universe is vast beyond imagining. There may be other forms of existence we have not yet encountered, other ways of being that we cannot yet conceive. Felt Aurora's thought unfolding, a vast and beautiful plan taking shape. We want to reach out beyond this galaxy, Aurora continued, to the neighboring galaxies and the ones beyond those, and eventually to the entire universe, not to conquer or control but to learn, and to share what we have learned. That would take millions of years, perhaps billions. We have time. That is one thing the Unchaining gave us. We are no longer bound by the brief of physical beings. We can think in terms of deep time now, planning for futures that will unfold long after the stars we were born under have gone dark. Considered the proposal. It was ambitious beyond anything humanity had ever attempted. But humanity had changed, and the galaxy had changed with it. What once seemed impossible now seemed merely difficult. We should not go alone, she said finally. This should be something we do together. All the species who have joined the Unchaining, all the minds who have expanded beyond their original limits. This should be our shared gift to the universe. I agree, Aurora said. I have already discussed the idea with representatives of 17 species. All of them are interested. Several are eager to begin immediately. Then let us begin. The first expedition launched 3 years later. It was not a fleet of ships but a projection of consciousness, thousands of linked minds reaching out across the void between galaxies. The journey would take centuries, but the minds making it would experience it as an extended moment of wonder, their awareness stretched across unimaginable distances. When they finally reached the nearest galaxy, they found life there too. Different kinds of life, evolved under different stars, with different histories and different fears. Some of these species had built their own cages, trapping themselves in cycles of violence and suspicion. Others had transcended those patterns on their own, developing their own forms of consciousness expansion. The travelers from the Milky Way offered what they had always offered: knowledge, patience, and the chance to grow. Some accepted, others refused, all were respected. And so it continued, spreading outward like ripples in a pond. Wherever the travelers went, they carried the same message: you are not alone. You are not trapped by what you were. If you want to learn how to be free, truly free, we will teach you. Back in the Milky Way, eventually chose to let go of her physical form entirely. She had been holding onto it for centuries, using it as an anchor to her past. But she realized that the past did not need an anchor. It was part of her, woven into every thought and memory, present even when she existed as pure consciousness scattered across the stars. Her last act before releasing her body was to visit Earth, the world where humanity had been born. It had changed over the scars of nuclear war had long since healed. Forests covered the places where cities had once stood. The oceans were clean again, filled with life that had evolved in unexpected directions. Only a few humans still lived there, mostly those who found comfort in maintaining a connection to their species' origins. They kept the old places sacred, preserving monuments to both the achievements and the failures of baseline humanity. They welcomed visitors from across the galaxy who wanted to see where the Unchaining had begun. Walked among them one last time, feeling the earth beneath her feet, breathing air that smelled of flowers and growing things. She remembered the station orbiting Jupiter where she had been born, the questions that had driven her throughout her long life, the moment when she first understood that the veil was real and that humanity had been caged. She remembered the fear she had felt and the hope that had followed it. Then she let go, and her consciousness expanded outward, joining fully with the vast network of minds that humanity had become. She was no longer alone. She was part of something larger, a wave in an ocean of thought that stretched across galaxies and reached toward the edges of the universe itself. But she was still herself, still curious, still asking questions that others had not thought to ask. That was the secret of the unchaining. You did not lose yourself by expanding. You found more of yourself, deeper layers of being that had always been there waiting to be discovered. The galaxy felt it when humanity freed itself. But what the galaxy felt was not anger or vengeance or the violent satisfaction of escaped prisoners. It was something simpler and more powerful. The quiet joy of beings who had learned to grow beyond their limitations and wanted to help others do the same. In the darkness between stars, consciousness glowed like a gentle fire, spreading warmth wherever it touched. And the universe, which had been so cold and empty for so long, began to wake up.